We're here today to talk about Thunderbird, John Proudstar, who recently had a book, a genocide book dedicated to him and to his resurrection after dying. We'll talk about that, but shortly after his first appearance in the 80s. And he's back, he's in full power, in new costume, and written by Steve Orlando and Nyla Rose, and with art by David Cutler. And we'll talk about each of the things that imply about the redesign, about the writing of it. So we want to like get our teeth on that. And for that, we have with us today SCOTT YAR, Marvel Morlocks in Twitter, and TRAVIS HEDGE COKE, usual Travis, and the usuals, Gabriel and Miduna, and let's go.
This week on Mutant Watch.
Okay, so first of all, I want to ask you all, what did you think of the character of John Proudstar before this issue, before what happened, like before we get into like, this is what happened in the issue, especially because like he's one of the few indigenous characters of Marvel at that time. Now things like have changed on that front, but at that time he's one of the few. And as I said before, he died not long after his introduction, and he has become, especially through his brother, through Warpath, kind of like a mythical character sometimes, and that's something that this book knows happens and knows how to like demystify in some way, but we'll talk about that later. But first, as usual, what did you think about the character, and if you were excited about the book just because of the character? Whoever wants to go.
I'll go first.
Yeah.
So I was very excited about it because I'd seen the uniform ahead of time and I wanted to see how they played it out. I had just read X-Men Red where he had popped up as well. So that was like, I had just seen him, and I had just seen him in New Mutants with his brother, and seeing that reunion and seeing the yo-yo of emotion with him that was going on shortly after Resurrection. And him being one of the first characters to bring back. And honestly, one of the characters that has stayed dead the longest in comics. You know, they finally decided to bring him back. Of course I was excited. That's an easy sell for me.
Yeah, I checked out the book specifically because it was Thunderbird, it was John Proudstar. I have not been a big fan, as I've said on previous shows, of several of the giant-size X-Men one-shots that we've had the last few years. So had it been almost any other character, I probably wouldn't have bothered. So yeah, definitely got brought in by that.
When it comes to Thunderbird, I'll be honest, prior to this issue, I've never been a big fan because of the way that he always felt very two-dimensional to me. He was more of a stereotyped concept than he was an actual fleshed-out character. At least that's what he felt like to me until this issue. So I was very, I wouldn't say excited, but I was very curious about what they would do. And then when I loved what they did.
I guess for me, I will say, I wasn't born in 1975. I wasn't born for another 5 years, but all of my life, Thunderbird, who's been dead all of my life, has been kind of two promises. One is how much potential there was in that character. Mm-hmm. And knowing, as I know now, that there was even more potential to begin with. The character was originally had a different visual design. They had a different agenda for him. They were going to play up his veteran status, that he was not just some noob out from nowhere, that he had just come from active service, that he had experienced things, was dealing with other things. Of course, he dies like 2 issues in, so none of that happens. The character was redesigned to be more visually stereotyped to make sure that readers would visually immediately see what they thought of as a Plains Indian kind of motif. So there's that kind of promise, that there's a character there that could have been all of these other things and never got the chance. And the other promise is, we're going to kill the Indian. I mean, really, that's who they got rid of immediately. And the arguments that were presented were always these sort of like half facetious arguments. Well, he was strong and we had another strong guy. Well, he's a pilot and Cyclops can fly the jet. And it's like, well, anybody can fly the jet. They're like the X-Men. And, you know, I'm sure they all have whatever. It didn't really hold up that well. We have to kill him because he's the only one that, you know, doesn't feel his own niche. Well, then write a better character, write a stronger character, do something, you know. Really, they just needed to kill somebody, and they just kind of picked lots. I think Wolverine was up for the slot at one point. Like, we'll kill Wolverine.
I wish so hard. I wish.
I mean, you know, financially and everything, that worked out great for a lot of people, but they just had to pick a character. It didn't have to be that character. So, and just briefly, while I'm thinking of it, I'm just going to throw this out here, and then we never actually talk about it again if we don't want to. But I'm still super weirded out by the third Thunderbird, the non-Indigenous Thunderbird.
Being from India.
Yeah, how he's Thunderbird, what the connection was there. Like, I never saw a comic really...
Well, because why wasn't he Garuda?
Yeah, there's no, other than I don't want to say Chris Claremont was just like, well, he's another kind of Indian. I hope there was other thoughts going on. And part of it's just they need to preserve a trademark. But that's always been super weird to me.
And I think I read somewhere that he actually was supposed to have a different name.
Okay.
I can't remember it exactly. It was something like Anji or something like that. But they went with Thunderbird instead because it was more familiar. And I wish I could remember where I read that, or even if I remembered fully what the name was.
Yeah, interesting. Because like in India, there's plenty of mythic birds. I mean, like the Garuda is a pretty straightforward one. It's not difficult to say, we need a mythic bird from India. Let's go with that. Thunderbird is kind of like pretty strictly North American for that particular terminology. And then because when you have your mythic bird, when you go to Europe, you got Phoenix.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like most cultures have their mythic bird. Like there's Obobu, which is another mythic bird down in Africa as well. Like pretty much every culture has their sacred mythic giants. It's going to eat us flying bird.
Yeah, I guess I also could answer my own question a little bit. I always, like I said before, I always saw John Proudstar as kind of like more of a mythical character figure, more of the memory of someone, the memory you have of someone when they die. He always felt that way because he was always referenced through other characters, especially his brother. And I like, it's not that I have a problem with characters being like that. It's just that it just so also happens to be the indigenous character of the book. And he was like a myth. And that's complicated, and I think kind of wrong. I think they could have seen that coming, because like what happened with Time in the 90s and etc. was that he was like more mythologized, like he was more myth than man. And this is a good way to get into the comic of today. I feel like the comic did a really good way of like starting with him out of costume and having like human feelings and emotions, like getting us into like a person,
who he is,
not a myth.
Yeah.
And that's how the comic starts. It starts. Yeah, go ahead.
Also,
go ahead.
Commentary on that, because you almost keyed in on something that I did want to mention as well, is like what I enjoyed is that if you actually know, if you know him through his like primary time in his short-lived experience with X-Men, he's always a character in conflict, in opposition, or in reflection of another character. Like whether it's his interpersonal relationship with Xavier being the white man, whether it's his inter-leadership conflict with Scott because he's a lone wolf and he doesn't, you know, he's either been a leader or been on point, and he's not going to take, you know, from this young white boy, like Boy Scout, when he's a soldier. You know what I mean? Like his character is always in definition in and even his relationship, his interpersonal relationship with Banshee, like him and Sean actually were like the closest, which I hope they explore again in the future. And I think that plays into the fact that both Banshee and him were supposed to have been ex-military soldiers. Now that you've commented on that, that makes a lot more sense to me, because they had the best interpersonal relationship that he had of that team at that point in time. I think the promise of being able to see him exist as an individual character for who he is, which is what you were saying, is something that he's never had in comics. As wild as that is to say, unless anybody can comment, I think that he doesn't even have a panel to himself in his own process. Like, he never exists as an individual character. He's always subordinate or into juxtaposition of another character. And I think that's not great, honestly.
Yeah. No, I mean, he's there for the other characters to reflect on and to be an anger against them. Like in his 3 issues, he's super angry.
Right.
But he's super angry because he's like a grown adult who is now being bossed around by like an 18-year-old kid. And as soon as they get to the mansion, Iceman immediately accuses him of being illiterate. Like the first thing they start doing is calling him Chief and Indian and asking him if he can read. And then he dies.
And it's been a bit since I reread those issues, but it always struck me as odd that it was very much framed that all of these things, they are valid reasons for someone to be angry, but it's always framed as him being outrageous for being angry.
Yes.
Like he has an anger problem for not being okay with being disrespected by children.
Yeah, that's it. I work in a university and I have young adults all the time that I'm working with, and patience is real, and I feel him some days. So maybe that's also why I empathize with him. Not sympathize, empathize. I felt that moment in my life, so I get it. But I think that it behooves the writers never to have given him even a moment of his own existence. The one time he's by himself, he's like on the plane. This is already the end of that. And then even in that, he's in juxtaposition to like everybody being like, but scream no. And it's like, dude, can this man just have a life? Have a moment? Like,
could he at least have had a death?
Yeah, right?
Yeah. There's a short, it's a backup in something else that takes place right before their first adventure when they're getting to know you. And the arc of the short is that Wolverine and Cyclops are somehow teaching the other X-Men patience. And it's weird because it's Wolverine and Cyclops. And like they just temporarily forgot that Wolverine's whole deal at that point was the not having patience, because it's Proudstar and Storm being quick to response and Nightcrawler being unsure of how to respond. But
that doesn't make any sense. Like like Kurt, Aurora, and Pietro, those are the 3 most steady eddies. Like they flow, you know? And Wolverine and Psyche are always in hyper anxiety mode. So fascinating.
And so I think even when they had an opportunity to do something How many times have they brought him back to life before this? At least 2, and then the fake one where it's a scroll, right?
Yeah, Necrotia was one, right?
Okay.
And then there was
He,
I don't know
I
if
don't know
there's
if he
another
came
one.
back, and I've not, just because I keep forgetting to read it, but he was involved in the Chaos God, Chaos King. It
The
was a Hercules
Chaos War.
story.
Yeah,
There we
he
go.
comes back in Chaos War too.
Okay.
Okay.
Don't know if I actually read that. That might have been something I skipped over. Maybe I'll go back and check that out.
But and even I have heard some good things about that, but also it doesn't matter because as far as the Thunderbird we have now, he's plucked right off of that plane essentially.
Yeah.
So anything
Correct.
that happened post death never happened as far as he's concerned.
Fair. Which also brings, I mean, because now he's also so young compared to everybody.
Yeah.
In the opposition to Sink, who is like so old compared to everybody. Old man Sink.
Yeah. Okay, so
I do have
getting
sure, go ahead. When we have time, I have a continuity question, which may be pertinent later. Would you like me to ask it now, or okay? In the issue,
no, ask it. Yeah.
In the current issue, because he goes back and visits his res and sees his family, I thought that they all got genocided in X-Force at some point, and they had like a whole revenge thing with that.
They
Correct.
make a mention in the beginning that it's his grandmother, his aunt. My memory is so bad right now. The relative that he visits wasn't living with that reservation.
Yes.
So she is the last survivor of the tribe.
Okay.
Because everyone else is dead, and they even make a point in referencing that James was too young to really have much memory of her when she moved away. And I think she makes a mention that, it's her own fault too, because when she left their grandfather, I want to say, she cut ties, and that's on her.
Yeah, okay. I saw that. I didn't connect those two things. Okay.
So she's like an exception to the genocide that happened.
Okay.
Nice little carve out. Just a happy little carve out right here, and it lives in a little continuity. Like,
okay, so now that that's clarified, we can go on as scheduled.
But I do also appreciate, like you said, that they did that little carve out instead of just trying to pretend that massive storyline never happened.
Fair.
Because it is a huge thing, and it is a huge issue with that the culture experiences, and then to just brush it aside would have been very dismissive, and I think counter to what the issue delivered on.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. Okay, so let's talk about the issue itself. I think we can divide the conversation maybe around the 3 parts. I don't know if there's exactly those 3 parts. There's the beginning of the issue where John Proudstar gets to has this entire internal monologue with himself, especially the part where I think it's very cool, like the part where he says that I'm not remembering the lines, but it's something along the lines of these 2 white men make an island for themselves and close themselves to the war. And I think he uses the word reservation also, or something like that. Yes, I think he uses that comparison in a way of isolating it from everything else, and that's not where he wants to be. So or at least not where he wants to be constantly. So he searches for that that other part of himself, which is I'm gonna search for my grandma, who is the last of my tribe, and I'm gonna search for other people whom I can connect to, for other indigenous people whom I can connect to, and kind of make this thing of I'm gonna live in the war and not live apart from the war. That's the first bit of the issue. I don't know if any of you all have any thoughts of that before we go to what happens next.
I think that it's interesting with what we talked about earlier, continuity-wise, how if we're following the supposed continuity, he had left the military, had just gone in with Xavier, just been killed, then just got rezzed into a new world, and now so he hasn't had any time to decompress.
Yeah.
Like, there's been very little time for him to be him compared to everybody else who's lived this entire time he's been dead. So I think that kind of makes sense with where they decided to take him. If you think about, I mean, that's where I'd be at. So I need that. I've been through a lot, and I need a second to breathe, and I need to recenter.
Well, and the issue, I mean, the comic is a lot more positive, but I would be surprised if Rambo was not, the original First Blood was not on their mind when they wrote the issue, because he's also Apache, right? Rambo's Apache.
Interesting.
So it's that sort of, he's literally just stopped being a vet, and then he went on this off the books mission for this bald rich guy.
Shoot.
And now he's going home and kind of checking up on people, and then there's trouble with the police and things spiral out of control. So it felt very First
Dude,
Blood
you're
to me.
right. That's amazing. I love it.
It goes positive at the end.
That's very Steve Orlando of them.
Wow. Good catch. Good catch. I like, now that you said it, I'm right there. I 100 catch on. That's brilliant.
I mean, he can't be a Vietnam vet now, but it still feels like it's a way to kind of do that. American fiction's in love with the Vietnam vet story, right? The last X-Files season had an episode with Vietnam vets, and the actors they got to play them in the modern day weren't even born during Vietnam, because we can't let go of Vietnam.
It's fair.
So I think this was an interesting way to do that kind of, and it works as a modern coming home story as well, but it felt very rooted to me in that sort of, that Vietnam narrative.
That's great. I like it, though. I think it worked out really, really well.
Yeah.
I was a big fan of the setup that they did, and how I think they're finally starting to address something that they've ignored a lot in X-Men, which is the intersectionality, and that kind of carried through about how the different aspects of his identity don't need to be in conflict. And it's something that his grandmother says to him over and over again, especially with today's X-Men, with how now mutant is a culture instead of just a genetic, a power. It very much is two aspects of his identity that he now needs to reconcile together when he gets brought back into the island of mutants, but being so fresh from his identity prior. And I think that they put the conflict on page so well. Even with the taunts that the little kids were giving him, it was right off the back, like, who he is was being questioned. And for X-Men comics, I think that aspect of identity and intersectionality is almost never spoken about, which is insane.
Yeah.
Well, go ahead.
Yeah. Something that made me very happy, and I think we can talk about this more when we talk about the end of the comic, like the conclusion of it, is that it seemed to carry a thread that was already open in the source story that Darcy Little Badger did of Daniel Moonstar, when Darcy Little Badger made this same argument of Danny is both a mutant and indigenous, and those things, like is both a mutant and Cheyenne, and those things are not like in conflict. They are things that can like go to work together, and the conflict is created by the people who are opposed to any of those two things, not by her. And I think that's something that carries onto this book, but like with way more like room for developing, and way more room for making sense. Not that it didn't make sense in the other book, it's just that it was only 6 pages. so it didn't have like the time to settle on the argument, and I think it gives more strength to what happened in the book with Danielle, because it was pretty similar in the way that it ended in a like reconciliation of those two cultural things, not only within her but as themselves, like as solidarity. But anyway, that was just like, it came to my head.
Yeah, I think there are definitely, I mean, some comics and some writers and artists who have dealt with that in a healthy way. There's a big history with X comics of it being unhealthy or of it being for a moment. And I'm thinking of
exploitative.
even like when Havoc did his "Don't Call Me a Mutant" thing, which had the response back with the Kitty Pryde, "I'm a mutant and Jewish," which got its own clap back. You have Dust in New X-Men, when Dust goes to Xavier and there's something wrong with Zorn, it's because Zorn, who's Magneto, tells her that you are a mutant above anything else. You have to downplay ethnicity, religion, whatever. You are a mutant, and that concerns her. And I've seen fan response of, well, that's how it should be. And this, I think this is why some fans are very comfortable calling people flat scans, like that's a real thing. It's not a real thing. You just want to say an ethnic slur, and you found one you can use, I guess. But there has been that kind of drive of put the X-Men before your culture, or put mutants before your culture, which is kind of Krakoa right now. They're kind of crafting this culture and really promoting it as the mutant culture, even though it's a totally artificial culture, largely made up by white people, a third of whom are like card-carrying Nazis. So I'm relieved that this issue dealt with it in a very healthy way, very positive way. I wasn't there 100% with this issue sometimes, particularly in that respect. But I was never going to be. Like, I'm not the target audience for this issue, and that's probably good in that sense. If this issue had been targeted to me, it would be way more political and sold less copies, and somebody get fired. So I think it's good in that way.
Goals.
Yeah.
I respect that.
Yeah. Okay, so as we move along on the comic, we see the conflict of what is happening, which sounds wild, but it's very similar to things that have happened in real life, so it's not that wild. Which is like how this, I don't even remember who's the villain, because he's like a random.
He showed up once.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say.
Random scientist, white guy.
I am never afraid to Wikipedia something I don't know. So the moment it was acting like we were supposed to know who this guy was, he showed up in an X-Force issue, or maybe an X-Force arc, that involved flashbacks to John Proudstar, and it was a James Proudstar story. And he was like pretending to be a mutant, I think, but like harvesting mutant powers. So it was like very similar to the concept. Yeah.
Yeah.
He's a biohacker and hacks himself into like a mutate kind of a thing, and that's kind of his like grift with selling technology to the government, is he biohacks like mercenaries. That's it.
And I liked him in the issue. I mean, I automatically know I don't like this guy, which is what you want with a villain.
Perfect. Yeah.
So, on that, as far as for the story, I thought it was fine. It was good. I just didn't know if he actually had past appearances, or if they just made like a guy who seemed like he could have come out of an earlier era.
Yeah, the villain is very relevant, but what he's doing is like kidnapping, and I'm guessing, I'm not sure if it's children only or just like random indigenous people for like experiments, and especially mutants. So like that's his theme.
Yeah, he like kidnapped the whole tribe because they wouldn't surrender the mutant. So it was like, well, if you won't tell me who the mutant is, I'll just take all of you and we'll figure it out later.
Actually, I do know one other place he's shown up, which was actually in a Punisher Wolverine comic that was very anime-esque in its art adapted style when Punisher was an angel.
Yeah.
Don't worry about it. It's Marvel. Don't worry about it. It's not that important. But in the story, there was another indigenous mutant who had like a death aura and basically was sucking the life out of everybody around him. So the only individual who could actually be around them was the Punisher because of his angel powers at that time, and Wolverine because of his healing factor. And so this individual also engineered her mutant ability into like a type of technology script. So they were in that comic as well. And basically they do kind of the same thing. They're like a Sinister wannabe, like a D-rate Sinister.
Okay, so yeah, that happens, and so Thunderbird goes to the rescue, and this is a pivotal point of the issue, not only because he's talking about how, and I think that this is a very cool retcon, because he's talking about how the original shoot was Xavier's idea. And I think that's a very clever retcon because it's like, it's a throwback to how the original suit was a white man's idea. But made into the story, and then he puts into the new suit, which I think we should talk about this suit like for a little while.
I do want to, aside from the aspect of the actual suit, what I just find it just made me smile is just a picture of Thunderbird fresh out of resurrection going up to Jumbo Carnation and being like, hey, I heard you're good at this, let's see what you can do. And I just love the picture of that conversation. Like, I can't think of a way it would not have been adorable.
Yes, thank you for that. Yes,
I would not have minded if this had been a mini series and had more time to breathe with scenes, because there were some things like the Jumbo stuff that's the text, and I know the text pages are a motif right now, and sometimes I think they're really good. Here it felt like they had enough material for a mini series, but you've got to shorten some of this, and so some of the scenes are just, well, I'm going to narrate this for right now. Because that would have been a great scene to see.
Page time is real estate, but yeah, I 100% agree. I mean, and for me, because I'm already in my headcanoning right now, right? And I can just see John being like, so, here's the color. I've been in the military. This is what I know works on my body. And Jumbo just being like, girl, working on a military man, I got you. Bright colors, I feel it. I mean, you see what I'm saying? Like, that is 100% like, and look at that hair. We need something that's going to protect that, because I cannot have your hair being touched in that fight. Let's give you a hoodie, girl. Okay. But look, I'm lining the interior of the hoodie. This is a golden fleece interior, with some light golden phoenix down filling in there. Just luxuriously hold that gorgeous hair together, because honey, we cannot have a man that fine looking bad on the battlefield. Okay. Like, I just feel all of that should have been in a comic. You're right.
And, it feels very superheroic to me. I love that, he gets resurrected, he hugs his brother, he gets heckled by some guys, and then he's like, I got to have a superhero costume. Like, the rest of
he's going to work.
They're very much doing I'm not a superhero anymore. We're the CIA. We're day traders. We're whatever they, the government, whatever they think they are. They're trying not to be superheroes, and he very much goes into superhero mode.
Yeah, absolutely. And okay, can I talk about the color now? Because I want to talk about
color.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yes.
I think this is the...
Sorry, I've been holding on to it. I'm like, I want to go.
Go ahead.
The reality is, like, so I think for all of us who've read the data page, and where I think the data page excelled in this book was when he talked about those colors, and he said, this is what those colors mean. And he's even talking about evolution. He's looking towards his future. He's like, there may be another uniform for me after this one that incorporates the white, that's going to make this complete, when I feel that I've reached that point. But having come back, being in this transformative space, being this transformative character, and also, like, people who know me from Twitter saw the post that I posted around it when the costume first came out that goes over this particular color, which is turquoise. And turquoise is associated with the lizard, which is associated with rebirth, which is a kind of a fun little quick story about coyote and lizard, is that these lizards were like sliding down a mountain all the time, and the coyote shows up and he's all very jealous that these lizards are sliding down, and gets down to the bottom and talks to the elder, and he's like, I want to be able to slide down with you guys to do this whole thing. And he comes back through every phase of the moon, and the elder lizard's like, this is lizard medicine, this is a lizard game, you can't do this, yada yada yada. So on the full moon, coyote does it again, and this time, like, he goes to do it and he breaks his neck and dies. Because he's soft and furry and he's not protected and he's not designed to like slide down on the sand down this hill and not get himself killed. But the lizards, not being mentoring and being healers and passing on generational knowledge, which has to do with them shedding their skins, go around him in the full moon and sing him back to life. And that's why turquoise lizard is preferred with resurrection in a lot of communities in the Southwest. And again, why turquoise is associated with that medicine of rebirth and protection and healing and those kinds of things. And, the Hopis have a kachina, like their specific kachina is that beautiful shade of turquoise. And, seeing that on his uniform, it's like he has donned himself in this healing medicine color in his work. And then he has the red on his shoulders and his knees, and he's got the gold, and those being representative of the work that he's doing right now, as well as a warrior with the red, and with seeking enlightenment and feeling ancestral knowledge through the gold and the path of the sun and its rays and things like that. And I think that when he talks color in one uniform and then you see this represented in another, for people within those communities, it's a visual language, it's a storytelling language, it's told through action, and it's told through color, and it's told through regalia. And so this uniform is really fascinating to people who can read the regalia and understand the colors. The uniform is his story. That's the story he's going to be in. So when he's making this superhero persona, he's painting himself with those colors, telling that story of where he's at. And for me, I was like, I know what that is and I love it. And thank you, because it's not for everybody, but for the people it's for, it says a very important message, I think. But that's my 2 cents on it. Thanks. Just wanted to get that out there.
Well, I think that's the most important part of the costume for me too, is that he's not communicating that to everyone, or even, breaking it down into something of an icon that can be easily read. He's specifically talking to a Native audience, both outside the book and inside the book. He's specifically going to his community and not necessarily addressing that broader, which has always bothered me since I found out about the original costume, the original design. Thunderbird went through a lot of design work. Storm is another one. Like Nightcrawler looked like Nightcrawler even when he was going to be at DC in Legion of Superheroes. It was always Nightcrawler, but Storm was going to be this Batwoman who they later actually do and call Nocturne in Spider-Man comics. They went through revisions. I called she was going to turn into a cat for a while, and so that became a different character, but she still has the cat eyes. That's why Storm's got the funny looking eyes. And Thunderbird, they initially had started working on him before they even really knew who was going to take over the relaunch. And so Roy Thomas was involved with the original design work on that with Cockrum, and then Len Wein came in, and they went through, at first he was the sacrifice. He was going to be the young noob who just came out of nowhere, and he dies. That was the original plan. And then they were like, well, the design looks too good because he looks like Captain America, because Cochran designed him to look like a military guy. He's got he was Air Force at the time, not Marines. He's got a helmet on and this very straight sort of superhero costume, which they've added some of the angular nature of the top into the new costume, which I like. Is from that original visual design.
Interesting.
And they were like, he looks too good to kill, and he doesn't look like a kid. This looks like the guy who would be like the co-leader or the leader. And so they start thinking about that. Like, well, he'll be the co-leader, and he can be co-leader with Scott. And Scott will be the old guard, and this will be the new guy. And then they got into doing the book, and they're like, well, somebody has to die. And they start doing, and eventually they decide on him. But the redesign came from above Roy Thomas, above Len Wein. I don't know who made that call. We can make some educated guesses because there's only so many people that were above them at that time. But the call was, you have to do a redesign because this design does not communicate Native American, does not communicate Indian. He needs to look Indian. And so that's when he gets the non-regulation longer hair, and he gets the very prominent fringe going on. And this redesign is a visual communication for a kid buying this at the gas station off a rack kind of thing. And that's, to me, when he becomes disposable, because when he looked really like a superhero, they didn't want to get rid of him. They wanted to promote him. And when they have to do this redesign, I don't know if they just got tired of redesign, tired of working on these characters. At some point you're like, okay, he can die. But that is always kind of, so when I saw how much effort went into the new costume, all of that kind of came back up. And it's like, this is a character who had so much work on his design to kind of take away what felt to me like real, something that could work. And now they have the character going in and putting in that work. And they had a native artist doing the designs and working on that. I don't know how much the writers, either on this issue or previous issues, had in that, how much work they put into the design, or if it was just the penciler for this issue. Does anyone know?
So there was a note at the ending of this issue from Steve Orlando where he said that he and Nyla Rose kind of got the design first, and it really helped inspire the story that they wrote.
Okay.
Yeah, David Cutler, they did the design first.
Okay.
Did the design, and it was based on it was most probably based on his own experiences with regalia. Like it says so in the notes at the end, that it was like a design that he did specifically for communicating the stuff that Scott has talked about. Like specific, like the intention is there, and not only because we know the result, but because it's literally written in the book.
That had been my assumption, but then I was afraid. I'm like, I don't want to take away, like, if they contributed something.
I did the research. I got you covered. I had that conversation. What was slightly interesting as well is and this is a long story, so I'm going to try and keep it brief. Like my mother's parents, both of her parents, both their mothers are from the Western Apache communities, from the Skokie and the Cossack communities, and Odanek, which is like a place up in Canada. And the artist is actually from the Eastern Wabanaki communities, like the Mi'kmaq and that all there. And my earrings actually right here are from my buddy Grayson, who's also part of that community out in Nova Scotia. And, regalia is a language, and, being autistic, we were talking before the video, and I just kind of want to share, like, when I saw that uniform, like, I read it. I literally felt the colors. I felt the story. I knew instantly kind of where this was going to go from the uniform, because he was like painting himself in his story. I don't know a better way of saying that. Like, I don't think in words, I think in visualization and texture, and it's a little bit, I just think differently. And so when I see stuff like this, it speaks my language, which I always think is kind of interesting as well, being autistic. And, I find that language very straightforward and direct. So for me, it was like doubly awesome, super spoiled, loved it all, was totally great.
Something that struck me while you guys were talking was with the multiple redesigns that Thunderbird went through and the multiple kind of redesigns of his backstory, you can see like the depth vanishing away as he became more stereotypical visibly. And then now this depth reemerging now that they are giving attention and care to his costume. And I think that's very telling. And I think that's like a kind of ignored aspect of comic books, particularly when we have like, gala looks every year now, and the story that these outfits could tell is often overlooked and not really dwelled on, as opposed to this, which it is such a crucial part and inspires the story.
Well, even his pouches look more functional than any that Cyclops has ever worn.
For real, like that uniform looks functional. Like, it doesn't just look great, it looks like it would work. Like, that is work clothes, and I'm here for it. Because, I mean, the knee pads. You know what those knee pads are there for, right? If he's already impregnable, what are those? Adamantium knee pads? I mean, what is going on in his fighting style, in how he's going to be engaging within these kind of superhero theatrics, that he needs to use some type of semi-armor on a nearly impervious body. Like, I love when, like, the bullets are hitting his face and he's just kind of, like, side-eyeing the bullets. Like, are you kidding me? You know what I mean? That moment was such a flex, and I was like, yeah, I'm loving this man right now. Just side-eye down those bullets. Like, you really do not want to do this.
Well, and I think Duna is right that, by the 90s especially, he'd really become like this head in the clouds ghost of the past.
Yeah.
It became a myth. He became a myth rather than a person. And so hopefully this is a sign of things to come, and that we're going to see, more development and more person.
I think with his brother and his grandmother, like, that story, which I hope we get to talk about shortly, is going to be, that's going to be the story, man. That is going to be the story. And I have a few things about that as well, so.
I don't know if I'm jumping ahead, but one thing that I also really loved about the issue is when Warpath was first introduced, when James Proudstar came in, like, everything about him was meant to be a copy of his brother, and then he kind of evolved from there, and there was some concern. I had some of this concern that kind of with John Proudstar coming back, how that would work with his brother still being active. But I felt that the issue did a good job in distinguishing between the two, in their look, in their fighting, in their personality. And I think that James showing up in his X-Force costume at the very ending, like that Black Ops one, was so intentional to be as like a contrast between the colors and the look that John was sporting. I think it did such a great job of showing that James and John, the Proudstar brothers, each have unique places in the modern era. And I felt that it was done with such intent and such care. I had to love it.
Yeah. I'm saving something that I have to say for the next bit, because we're going to get there. Okay, so yeah, running ahead on the issue, this villain is held by cops, obviously. Of course, they're always doing the nicest things, like helping, like...
So helpful.
Yeah, exactly. Cops, helpful. Anyway, so obviously, John Proudstar beats up a bunch of cops. One of my favorite moments of the issue, for no particular reason. And and he gets to liberate, gets to the point of towards the villain, gains the villain, beats a bunch of cops, etc., and gets to this point where he's gonna kill this villain, and gets interrupted by his grandma, which is one of my favorite characters from this book. and it's great because there's something, and we can talk about this now. There's something that I feel like this scene could have gone very wrong, and it went very well. Could have gone very wrong because it could have been something like, you don't have to kill because it's morally blah 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 blah, and it doesn't go exactly on that route. It goes on the route of think about the consequences of your actions for other people that don't have your advantages, that don't have your position, that are not superheroes. Think of how we are going to manage this situation after you're gone, because you can't be here forever. And it's I feel like it's one of my favorite scenes of the book, because it shows it shows depth in the character of the grandma. I'm trying to remember the name, but it seems like she has a depth to some practical understanding, and that also is a very credible thing to do. It's a thing that I would imagine from a lot of grandmas that have gone through some really rough stuff. So it feels very human.
True to the communities.
Yeah.
And
so, go ahead.
Even the way she enters the scene, it is done in such a kind of confident, unbothered way. She's literally walking in on an epic battle between this monstrous creature and her dead grandson. And she's just like, Johnny, is that you? Okay. How about you not do this? And it is done. She is such a badass character. And like you said, I think that speaks to the life that she had prior, that what's in front of her, she's so unaffected by, because she's seen shit before.
Yeah.
So she can address the shit in front of her in a rational, calm way. Like you said, she's my favorite character, and she's so badass.
I'm just relieved he has some family, because I can't even remember how the genocide went down, except Strife paid somebody, or somebody paid Strife or something, and then his brother has to fight somebody in a dream, and so it's there. I knew it was there, but I didn't know how total it was. I wasn't sure, are we going to deal with that at all? Because he hasn't been around for the mutant culture rise. And so the fact that there's been at least 2 genocides on mutants since he died, significant ones, maybe it means something, maybe it doesn't mean anything. But people he grew up with, his hometown, that's going to resonate. And so that they did find a way to have family without, taking that away. I'm grateful that she's in the story. I'm grateful that she's there.
100. I think something that I'll touch on as well, because this touches on my family, and it's a good segue into that, is the diaspora aspect of what happens within Native communities. Because you end up having, there were only 3 surviving members, right? It was the younger brother, the older brother who was already dead, and now the grandmother. And once that genocide happened, those individuals who were all of a tribe became single individuals until the very end of this book. And it's interesting where this story went, because one of the things that's been going on in my home state of Maine is they're finding out how the Department of Human Services stole so many children and laundered them directly through the Catholic Church out into white families and immigrant families to depopulate the populations of the Wabanaki in the western communities of New England, which is why there aren't any tribal lands up there at the level that you see in the rest of the country, when people are like, oh, there were just never any Native Americans up there. I'm like, yeah, there's a reason for that. And it's very academic and intentional. But how nowadays, since Truth and Reconciliation's been happening up there, it's called Dawnland. If you ever want to watch a video about that on YouTube, they have been finding all the lost records and bringing all those communities back. And that's a lot of what we found out with our grandfather and finding his sister and his mother after his passing away because of this as well. So it's been interesting to have a great grandmother who outlived my grandfather and have that whole experience in my life. So it's been interesting watching that in a comic book as well, because like, I knew that. I kind of felt that kind of a deal.
Yeah. Okay, so I guess we can get to the end of the issue. Oh, Gabriel told me the name of the grandma, Cisco Lawson.
Oh, Lawson,
Thank
yes.
you, Lawson.
And I feel I have to apologize for this little guy, but he is 16 years old, and so he is crying and wants to be held. I figure at 16, I have to hold him. So that's so the ears keep popping up.
He doesn't want to be held. He wants to be a movie star. That's
Yeah.
You're just a means to an end. He just wants to be on camera.
Okay, so as we get to the end of the issue, because like Scott drove us there, the end of this issue. No, it's perfect. Like you really went like this the connection between the two things, like super
Perfect
well.
tangent.
Perfect tangent. We get to the end of the issue, and it's a really emotional and really like joyful. Like it put a smile on me. It made me cry a little bit because like you have these three characters. Like Scott has just said it, that were apart because partially because of the genocide and partially because of many other things that separate families. And of course John died, and these three characters get together now, and they have an old picture of when they were together like a long time ago, and they recreate that picture this time with the costumes, and it's just like so emotionally compelling, and that's where I was gonna go before. Before, like the thing that I had noted down is that when I was talking before about like how before this book Thunderbird felt like a myth and now he feels like a person, I think this is a really, really important theme for that, because it's one of the things that makes characters, and I'm gonna go a moment over to DC, but it's things that makes characters like Superman so connecting with so many people. It's that they have real human connections and they feel like people we can relate to and people we can aspire to be. And I feel like this scene and how they held each other and how they managed to like maybe not solve the whole problem, because it's probably that the conflict of this issue is not like suddenly solved and nothing else bad is going to happen to these people. That's not true, but they are working on a way of being like present for each other and working towards something different. And that's something that if you are reading it and you are thinking about any type of social conflict, political, etc., you aspire to be something like that, and you aspire, and that's a very like, I don't know, it feels very human. Like they're
Absolutely.
like very flawed characters that are in this moment are doing something very aspiring and heroic. In this moment, they pull out the strength to do that, and then they get together and have because they need each other. And that for me was the perfect closure to the issue, with the internal monologue ending on how he's mutant and indigenous, etc. But like, especially that ending with the photo was like, I'm complete. Like this was a perfect issue for me.
I really like the end up until the last page, and I could do without the last page just because it's another running with the buffalo image, and we've seen this.
Yeah,
I sort of, I know the inclination to it, I know the drive, but it wasn't necessary to the story, and it's also something we've seen way too often. But
Yeah.
up until that point, when it's just about the three of them as a family, I'm right there with it. It's my favorite part of the issue.
I think if it had been him racing his brother, I might have enjoyed it better. Do
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like if the Bison had been replaced with
Yeah.
Warpath, and we saw the two brothers and like his grandmother in the background, like with like the flag, like them racing and she like
Yeah.
a family slice of life moment. I think that would, not to judge, not to, editorialize, but I think that I would have, that would have been that one moment to kind of like create that same kind of, I guess, visual parallel, but then maybe modernize it and really kind of move him. Does that make sense? Like move him forward as a family and kind of like, because I saw what they were trying to do. They were trying to open and close with bookends, right?
Yeah.
But I think the bookend would have been a little bit better if we had served and replaced the buffalo with his brother, and then had his and turned into like a family scene with his like grandmother and a flag or whatever. I don't know. I mean, they got to be excited to be back together. I mean, that's just, I know that feeling personally.
Does he know that his brother can fly? Have they dealt with that in?
I don't think they've spoken about that at all.
Because, like being a former military pilot and your brother can fly, like it feels like there's something there.
Dude, he's gonna have some like big brother, little brother issues. His brother's big too, so he's like smaller, can't fly.
But also to be fair, I know that there are a lot of times that continuity and writers like to pretend that James can't fly. It's something that I feel like there was a scene in Weapon X where James flew and everyone else like had forgotten he could do it, and he was like, yeah, I don't do it often, like, so and what I also do think is interesting, and I would love to see them delve more into, is the difference between the brothers' powers. Like how their strength, how their indestructibility can John heal like James can? Can John eventually fly? I would love to see them delve into that more. And just kind of going back to what everyone was saying about the way the book ended, I understand that it is a John Proudstar book, but I would absolutely love to see this get delved into more from James' perspective as well, since he experienced losing everything and everyone, and that isolated aspect has been a big part of his character. And now not only is his brother back alive, and we got to see some of how like that anxious energy of finally being able to be reunited with his big brother, I would also love to see like, I have a grandmother, like that kind of, he has a family now. He's never had that, or he hasn't had it for so long. And just the emotional punch that must feel, I would love to see that on the panel as well.
I really like the scene, the specific panel where he's like, "Are you my grandma?" Because that's it's a very soapy X-Men moment. But it's also one that he's never really been afforded before. Even when he's hanging out with other natives, like back in the old X-Force, when he hung out with Risque, right? They kind of did this weird thing where they're both native, but they're not the same. Like they never really dealt with the fact that they're both native, even when they're dating or when she's changing his clothes or whatever. So giving James some community back and some family back, I would love to see that book as a one shot, or just give them both series. I'm sure there's some other series that we can cut,
Speaking of which, I'm super excited to see him. I think he's going to be an X-Men Red, and if he shows up with Brotherhood with the personalities we're seeing there, I could see him thriving in that kind of environment. Because I feel it. I get his distrust of the establishment. I get all of it. And if they are going to move him forward, grow him, and give him room to be who he is on his own terms as a character, as we have seen it, then Brotherhood really feels like, and he has a history with Aurora. I can see him being excited to see her having moved on and supporting her in that, being like, see, I told you, all these guys were completely out of it. Like, why did you even put up with it?
Yeah, I can wait to that.
I also theoretically would love the concept of him and Roberto and how their personalities could clash or work together. Especially, and I have said this many times, I love Ewing's Sunspot more than any of the
Yeah.
Sunspot I've read because he is able to treat Sunspot like the competent character he is. And I think that Roberto's competence and immaturity will work really well with John's experience and leadership skills. And I would love to see like a mentorship going on between the two of them.
And
Interesting.
I definitely
can see that.
Yeah, like with John and Jumbo in this issue, we don't really see the scenes, but you get the idea that John could talk to him and could talk him into this. I could very much see John talking Berto into funding him for something. There's something he can be spending his money and his sway on, and I see them getting on that way. And I think that would be great. We need a community of mutants for John as well as a native community. We need to see him with people who aren't just making him angry,
Oh, interesting too, because Shiro's over on Mars right now.
Mm-hmm.
So it's almost like Shiro's going to be there, Storm's going to be there, Banshee's over there every so often as well, like when he's not being murdered by Moira. Like, because he's going to be showing up in Legion of X, so we know that he's, that's not a spoiler. They've talked about him being one of the kind of in and out characters. Interesting. You're right. I like that. That's fascinating. He will have because those are mutants he does know, and at least they're going to be in his proximity.
Yeah.
And even with Magneto being involved in that title as well, I think it works very well with Thunderbird because they killed him off before he got a chance to actually fight Magneto. So he's not going to have any of the animosity that should be there, but usually isn't. So I think it could also flow really well.
He's
got
not
less baggage.
He's not going to know what to expect or not carrying on this stuff which is a good thing if they can play that for new readers too, if they can play that and open things up. I'm sure sales are great on the X books right now, but I do feel like we've dove back into a little bit too much of the ingrown toenail territory in that way. I don't know how easy it is for somebody to get into X-Men right now if they want to get into X-Men. And a character who's been dead all this time, that's a good way to just have a window for new readers, for new people.
Yeah, X-Men Red is pretty new reader friendly so far. It gets into some stuff. Man. Yeah, it gets into some stuff that happened in Sword, but if you haven't read Sword, you can still catch up on the book. And yeah, I can't wait to see John Proudstar in that book. Especially
Ewing is going to have Proudstar. My cup floweth over. My cup floweth over. I cannot wait.
Yeah. So, well, I think we're done because the last question that we had was this. You go the last question was what do you want from the character from now on? And you all literally said we went naturally through every phase of everything we had prepared without having to make the questions. They just came as we were speaking. So yeah. So thank you both, Scott and Travis, for coming to this show. This was very, very special. I recommend everyone to read this issue. This is a great book. This is a great book for one shot, and it really gets into if you have listened till here, you know why you have to read it. And if any of you want to say anything that has been maybe left unsaid, I don't know. I feel like we cover everything magically perfectly, but in case.
No, I just enjoyed the book. Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah.
I enjoy
Thanks for
hanging
coming.
out
Thank
here
you
with
for
you guys.
coming.
Yeah, it was great. And we'll see you soon.